and locations in the chat, just so we know where folks are calling in from. We have folks from all over the country here, and would love to know if y'all are with any organizations as well. So my name is Celine. I'm with the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights and based in Southern California. And we just want to welcome you all to our webinar today. We're going to be talking about why it's important for us to be organizing for an arms embargo, especially at this moment. And we're going to be hearing from organizers working on campaigns in Oakland and Virginia to learn more about how we can do this on a local level. So just before, just so we get started, we're gonna make sure that we're gonna be moderating this chat. So basically we're gonna have an hour together. I'm gonna just do a quick introduction. We'll get into a panel with our speakers, a discussion with our speakers. We'll have a bit of time for Q&A. If you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A feature in the Zoom. It's really hard for us to follow all the questions that are going to come up in the chat. So if you have a question, use the Q&A feature. We'll try to answer them throughout and leave some time at the end for our speakers to answer your questions as well. Also, this is an anti-oppressive space, like any racism, Zionism, sexism, Islamophobia, like anything, any language like that in the chat will result in an automatic ejection from the event. So that's not going to be tolerated while we're here. Again, we're here to learn and to exchange lessons and strategies to support on how we can organize around this demand for an arms embargo, why it's an important demand in general. So as you all are probably very aware, Israel has already violated the ceasefire about 80 times while continuing to occupy and displace and imprison and slaughter Palestinians across Palestine. Just this week, Israel launched heavy airstrikes on Gaza. It announced suspension of aid. And while these bombs over Gaza have not stopped, the U.S. continues to send weapons to Israel. And it's clear, we've always said this, that a real ceasefire is not possible without an arms embargo. And we need we need to be organizing for a real end to this genocide. And that's going to take a real arms embargo and an isolation of Zionism. So our job in this moment is to really keep organizing, to increase the pressure even more than we've been increasing it, to hold accountable every actor that's enabled or perpetuated or participated in this genocide. And right now, the demand for a comprehensive two-way arms embargo is central to our movement. Israel's genocide in Gaza was not like a rupture in the trajectory of Zionism. The genocide is part of the longstanding Zionist plan to liquidate the Palestinian people and our struggle. And what we've seen over the past 2 years is an accelerated version of the last 100 years of Zionist occupation and violence. But despite 2 years of US-Israeli genocide in Gaza, their conspiracy, the imperialist conspiracy to drive our people from our land, to drive us into exile, has failed. And Israel is left with a devastated economy. It is despised and isolated and hated all over the world. And support for the Palestinian struggle has never been higher. So it's our responsibility to refuse to allow that momentum to die and to turn this support and energy into concrete gains by organizing for the implementation of arms embargo and by isolating Zionism in whatever ways that we can. And we've seen around the world communities organizing to stop weapons transfers. We've seen dock worker actions in place in countries like Italy, in different parts of Europe. We're seeing people hold governments, corporations, their cities, their ports accountable for their complicity. So we're really excited on this webinar to bring together organizers who are directly participating and leading this work in their locales that we hope that we can all learn from as we develop these campaigns in our own cities. So in August, a local campaign in Oakland was launched to address the role of Oakland Airport in its shipments of military cargo to Israel. This was exposed by a report from the Palestinian Youth Movement, and they launched a coalition alongside AROC Action and USPCN to advocate for a local arms embargo and an end to the use of civilian infrastructure for transporting military cargo used in the genocide. And we also saw in Virginia, I believe also in August, a statewide coalition initiated the Virginia Pension Divest campaign, demanding an aid to the state pension fund's investments in arms companies and logistics companies complicit in the transfer of weapons to Israel. And this has been an effort to mobilize community members, employees, and workers across the state to support this demand. So we have our speakers here, Lubna, Ruqayya, and V from these campaigns, so we want to welcome them. And again, really excited to have you all here, especially I think in this moment, a lot of people have been really excited to hear about how they can learn from the work that you all have done locally, and any tips, guidance you can offer to people. So that's kind of what we're going to get into here. So I'm going to start with V. If you could tell us about the Oakland campaign for an arms embargo, what research did your campaign expose? And what's your strategy and demands, and maybe like a little bit about how you guys kind of landed on your target too.
Yeah, thank you so much, Celine, for inviting us here, USCPR for hosting this really important webinar, and for giving us the opportunity to speak a little bit about the Oakland Arms Embargo campaign and hopefully share some of the lessons and some of the things that we've been learning here locally to hopefully implement across the country and in your cities and locales. So for the Oakland People's Arms Embargo campaign, it was launched at the end of August at the People's Conference, where we released a research report just before that uncovered Oakland's hidden and central role in the transportation of military cargo to Israel. So we were able to uncover this research and able to uncover Oakland's role in the shipping of F-35 fighter jet components. And this happened through the methodology and the infrastructure that was set up through the Mask Off Maersk campaign as the PYM. So Mask Off Maersk set up this infrastructure and methodology to track shipments of military components to Israel across the world. We started with maritime shipments and then went up to the chain to understand the role of airports and the role of the F-35 supply chain as one of the most expensive and deadliest weapons on the market. And looking at airports and looking at the F-35 supply chain, we started to see this flow, and we were shocked, honestly, and surprised that Oakland popped up on the map. And not only did Oakland pop up on the map, not only is Oakland a facet of the supply chain to the Israeli military, what we found in our research is that it is a central node in the shipping of military components and F-35 fighter jet components to Israel. Oakland is actually one of the most frequent departure points for this supply chain in the country, second only to Fort Worth, Texas. And I think just to do a high-level overview about the research, what's important to understand about these shipments is one, the frequency, the destination, and their content. So the frequency of these shipments is that, at least 280 military cargo shipments have been identified as departing from the Oakland airport. And these shipments are flowing multiple times per week, almost every single week over this past year. The destination of these shipments, at least 96% of them, is the Nevatim Air Base, which is where Israel's entire F-35 fleet is stationed and maintained. And the contents are wide-range components that are essential to the functioning of the F-35 fighter jet, including the BRU-68 units, a bomb release unit that's used to outfit Israel's F-35s with 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs that have massacred our people in Gaza and in Palestine, including in the Al Mawasi massacre in 2024. So the reality is that these shipments confirm the frequency, the contents, and the destination confirm beyond a reasonable doubt that Oakland sustains the combat readiness of Israel's Air Force, and that these shipments are being used by the Israeli military to commit what has been internationally recognized as a genocide and war crimes. I think what's also important to understand is that if we don't stop this now, this will only increase, right? There are three main players that are interacting with this supply chain. That's Lockheed Martin, that's FedEx, that's the Defense Logistics Agency, and that's the Oakland Airport. Those are the four main players. And the Defense Logistics Agency, which manages the distribution of these shipments from the US to Israel, has a warehouse in Tracy. That's an official warehouse for these components and for these shipments, right? And is, distributing these specific components that are used by the Israeli F-35. And the DLA, the Defense Logistics Agency, needs Oakland's airport, needs our public infrastructure and our civilian infrastructure to ship this military cargo to Israel. And it's urgent that we stop this now, because Oakland um, as one of the most frequent departure points, is going to just increase its shipments to Israel because the Defense Logistics Agency has basically declared their intention to shift the main warehousing and distribution from Fort Worth, Texas to Oakland and to Northern California, which, Fort Worth, Texas is now number one. It's home to the main production hubs for Lockheed Martin, which is why they're number one in the, most frequent departure points for the shipping of these components. But, the intention is to shift Oakland and Northern California to be that number one. So if we don't put an end to these shipments flying out of Oakland now, they will only get worse. And I think to speak a little bit about the strategy, we were shocked to find this out, right? We were shocked to find out that Oakland plays such a central role in the supply chain, given the history of Oakland as a hub for social and progressive movements. And we're sure that our city leaders and our elected officials were also shocked when we released this report and shocked to find that Oakland plays such a central role in the facilitation of genocide. But now that we've exposed Oakland's hidden shipments to the Israeli military, we have a responsibility to do something about it. And for the local Oakland People's Arms Embargo campaign, we're taking up a municipal strategy that's targeting the Oakland mayor, Barbara Lee, the Port Authority, and the Oakland City Council to really reach three main demands. The first is to immediately seize all military cargo shipments from Oakland Airport to Israel. The second is to implement an arms embargo through a permanent policy that prohibits the use of Oakland's public infrastructure and finances for military transfers to Israel. And the third is to create governmental processes of accountability and transparency to ensure that Oakland is not complicit with genocide worldwide. And really, the strategy behind this is to show that everyone involved, from our city leaders to the Port Authority, to the city council, has a responsibility to do something about this, about our civilian infrastructure, about our public infrastructure being exploited to sustain the Air Force and the military of a foreign government conducting what the UN has officially deemed as a genocide, right? It's a moral and tangible responsibility. And we know that there are indeed actions that the airport, the Port Authority, and local decision makers and electeds are able to take, and that it's an incumbent responsibility to find pathways and to ensure that Oakland is not complicit in genocide and that our public infrastructure and civilian infrastructure isn't used to facilitate war crimes. And I think, the logic is that this municipal campaign here in Oakland sets a precedent for sister campaigns across the country, right? Emphasizing the importance of leading initiatives to move ceasefire resolutions from symbolic declarations to tangible and material actions, right? And the movement for a ceasefire, right? The Bay Area, launched the movement for a ceasefire. Richmond was the first city to pass a ceasefire resolution. Oakland was really close to follow in November of 2023. And really to uphold the spirit of those ceasefire resolutions that were passed, we need an arms embargo. It's only by ending the flow of weapons and equipment that Israel uses to annihilate the people of Gaza that a ceasefire will be possible. Right? That's only through an arms embargo will a ceasefire be enforced. And just like ceasefire spread like a tidal wave across cities across this country in 2023 and 2024, where people took it into their own hands, in their own cities, in their own locales, when the government representatives were not, heeding our demands, we need to do that now for an arms embargo. And it's even more important now that this so-called ceasefire has been reached to actually raise the ceiling of our demands, to make arms embargo unavoidable and relentless, and make it, something that is popular and common sense across the country and across the U.S. as the main facilitator of these weapons shipments to Israel. So I hope that answered your question, and really, got into some of the research, the strategy, the demands, that hopefully folks can learn from and take back.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much, V. And I think it's clear given, the coalition you all have built too, that it takes a lot to organize a strong campaign, including not just knowing this information about your locale, but being able to organize people around it. So yeah, I want to move to Lubna too. If you could tell us about the no pensions for genocide, the VRS campaign, basically similar question, like strategy, demands, and how you relate this campaign to the overall movement for arms embargo.
Yeah, thank you. So the VRS campaign, so VRS stands for the Virginia Retirement System, which is the body here in Virginia that controls the pensions for a lot of the public employees in the state of Virginia. And so what it effectively has done, and what we uncovered with a FOIA request, is that it's basically made every single public employee in Virginia and every single taxpayer complicit in this genocide by investing those funds that they have set aside for their retirement pensions and investing them into 14 weapons manufacturers, including Maersk, but as well as companies like Lockheed Martin and BAE Systems. And so the way that we've gone about this campaign is by having multiple fronts to address the campaign from multiple different aspects to make sure that it's all united and we're moving forward in a very collective strategy. So our fronts include both a media, a mobilization, an electoral front, and as well as a labor front. And so kind of because of the public employee aspect, this really brings back into the labor movement and kind of strengthening that mass movement as a whole to really push this campaign forward. The demands are just twofold. One, obviously divest any funds from these 14 weapons manufacturing companies, but two, also build in policy to prevent any future investment back into any sort of weapons manufacturing company or any company that facilitates genocide in Gaza or anywhere else in the world. And so the way that we have gone about it is right now with the popularization phase is by purely just talking to people to, first of all, get them to associate the VRS with the genocide in Gaza, but also associating with the fact that the VRS, against the will of all these Virginians, has taken their funds and invested it into all of these different weapons manufacturing companies instead of other investments like here in the community or other investments that are already on the payroll for the VRS. The VRS itself has a $121 billion pension fund that they invest annually. And of that, 300 million are invested into these 14 companies. And so what that means is that one, that number is usually really surprising to people because based on interviews that we literally just did a few days ago, a lot of people underestimate how much money is actually being invested by these local organizations, local companies, but also because it's only 300 million out of the 121 billion pension fund, it makes it a much more winnable campaign because in comparison, it's a, in theory, a small amount. And so it should be something that is fairly easy for the VRS to divest if we can get them to be moral and ethical about their investments in general. But that'll come in due time. And so the way that this relates to the overall arms embargo campaign is it makes it very local. I think a lot of the time, what we've seen is the past 2 years of genocide, but also with the arms embargo in general, is that people have seen the wins out of it and have celebrated it absolutely, but have kind of found it difficult to relate here to the local aspect because we don't have a clear Maersk target necessarily here in the DMV. But the reality is there's still, we're in the DMV, so the weapons manufacturers call these places home. And so it brings it back to a local level. And not just from the fact that these companies, a lot of them are based here, but the fact that Virginians' own money is actually being used to facilitate this genocide. And so by driving forward this campaign, what we're asking, obviously, aside from the demands, is for Virginians to have a choice in where their investments go, and that their simple ask for having a pension fund is not invested into any sort of genocide or weapons manufacturers in general. That was a lot faster than I intended, but yeah, I think that covers it for what the VRS campaign is.
Thank you so much, Lubna. And I think this is these are both really good examples of when we're thinking about arms embargo and how it relates to our everyday lives, like here in our, our cities day to day, is that obviously this is about the use of what V's saying, public infrastructure, and what Lubna's saying, which is our public funds, our where our investments are going. And this is taxpayer dollars. This is your retirement fund. We should have a say in where these things get invested, or like how public infrastructure, public land gets used. Like these are the ways that we're relating like arms embargo to kind of everyone's day-to-day lives. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of appreciation for our speakers in the chat. So definitely like, yeah, they're very clearly articulating how they're organizing this, and obviously like we're talking about ways to organize around the same demand in different ways in different locales, because again, we're not just thinking about like what do we know about our cities and how our cities are complicit. We're also thinking about like how can we organize people around our demands and bring them together under one campaign. So I'll move into this question for V, like if you can talk to us a little bit about effective strategies for outreach to popularize your demand and your campaign. Like we know you all have been engaging workers and organizations and community members all over Oakland. How are you reaching them, basically? Because I know that's something that a lot of groups have questions about whenever we meet with them. So would love to get into that.
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, in the Bay Area, we've built a broad multiracial coalition of over 30 Bay Area organizations that represent, communities, immigration, youth, labor, faith organizations that are taking up an active role in organizing this campaign. So building this coalition and giving organizations and people who care about what's happening and want to take up an active role, giving them that role and consolidating that broad base of support that the Palestine movement has gained over the past 2 years is really crucial to popularizing arms embargo, and popularizing our demands. And I think it really comes back to, what you were saying earlier around how do we actually talk about the use of public institutions and public infrastructure in war and militarism, right? We want our public institutions and we want our civilian infrastructure to be invested in the issues that we care about and that our community cares about and that our neighbors care about, in community, in health, in safety, right? Not in shipping military cargo, and not to be invested in weapons, and militarism, and I think like building this broad base is really it's important to understand and to be able to articulate how arms embargo is a local issue, right? It's an issue that is related to labor. It is an issue that is related to reproductive justice, that is integral to racial justice and to immigration rights, right? And is central to the fight against oppression and fascism. We have an organization, the Black Organizing Project, in our coalition that has fought and won against police presence in Oakland schools. So we don't want police in our schools because we don't want the militarization of our public institutions. We don't want them to be taking part of war in the same way that Oakland Airport should not be facilitating the transfer of military cargo to Israel. In the Bay Area, in San Francisco, and in Oakland, we're expecting heightened attacks against our immigrant community as soon as tomorrow, as we prepare for federal troops and for mass ICE raids that are expected to start as soon as tomorrow. Oakland is again on the front lines of U.S. militarism, and the same empire that is funding and supplying Israel's genocide in Gaza is deploying troops into Black, brown, and immigrant neighborhoods here at home, waging a war on our neighbors, on our community, on our immigrant siblings. And I think making it clear that occupation is a crime, whether in Palestine or in Oakland. Kidnapping is a crime, whether by ICE or the IOF, and that these things are integral and they are connected. And we need to make these connections to build a broad fighting movement for dignity, for liberation, for justice. And that's also the importance of organizing with workers and with labor, because the interests of workers globally are the same as the interests of the Palestinian people. The interests of the people of Oakland are the same as the interests of the Palestinian people, right? We are against war and militarism, kidnapping, occupation, and all of these things are really it's important to make those connections and to show how they are tied to each other. And I think that and that understanding is what has built this broad-based coalition and has also at this point brought over 150 local organizations and businesses who have endorsed the campaign, and over 10 major labor unions locally and nationally, including the UAW Region 6, which has over 120,000 workers across the West Coast. The International Longshore Workers Union, Local 10, has also endorsed the Oakland Arms Embargo campaign, as well as the California Nurses Association and SEIU 1021, and being able to really demonstrate those that broad coalition support is important to popularizing, is important to outreach, and is important to actually really building a fighting movement to confront these systems of oppression that are affecting us all, an empire that is reaching in its hands into all of our communities. So having broad coalition is important to popularization and outreach, and also having consistent outreach and being able to have mass outreach on a consistent level is has been crucial for our campaign locally. We've been having consistent outreach days every weekend where we plug in members of our coalition and our organizations, making a broad call to get hundreds of volunteers from across the movement to participate in these outreach days at central locations across Oakland, like farmers markets, festivals, events, things that convenes the community. And being able to articulate why this matters on a local level to the people of Oakland. I mean, we've trained hundreds of folks to speak about the campaign. They're self-organizing, incorporating it into every event locally, passing out posters and flyers, business outreach in Business Hub and locations have a lot of mass and have also had businesses put up the posters and the QR code for the petition in their windows. And really just talk about why this matters to Oakland and how we need to take our city back from these genocide profiteers that are exploiting and using our Oakland airport to facilitate war crimes and militarization that boomerangs back to attack our communities here. And this is not just happening in the Bay Area. This is happening across the country. We listed, more than 20 other cities that are complicit in the supply chain in our report. So encourage folks to read the report at armsembargonow.com and to read KQED, a local news source's groundbreaking article that verified the research. And this research was really developed and is an opportunity to launch similar campaigns in your area. But I also want to address this question of research, because say you aren't one of those cities, say you don't have all this research, you aren't able to find it or specify a target or a particular supply chain in your city, you can still take up an arms embargo. You can work with labor unions to pass statements or resolutions in support of an arms embargo, or work with electeds in your city to make public statements. You can also pass a resolution at the city council level, especially if you've already passed a ceasefire resolution. This is how you make that tangible and concrete, that ceasefire resolution that was passed. And how do you continue to build a broad base of support for an arms embargo, continue to generate and embolden political will to stop the weapons and equipment flowing from here to Israel, from doing outreach at union halls to major community and local events, tying arms embargo to all the other local issues that folks in your city care about, right? Is there a hyperscale data center that is also being built in your city? And how do you connect the role of AI that these data centers are being used for to actually the use of AI and these same companies like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google in powering the first AI genocide in history, right? So being able to make those connections, to identify what your city, what your locale cares about, and connect it to why an arms embargo is necessary and important in your city and in your locale. Because we need to be relentless and unavoidable when it comes to our demand to stop the shipping of weapons and military cargo and equipment from the U.S. to Israel, right? Because we know without the U.S., there is no genocide. Without the U.S., there is no Israeli military, right? We have something that we can do, and we have a role in this. And through these steps, you are building those conditions and you are building that foundation for an arms embargo to be something that's common sense in your city and in your locale. And an arms embargo campaign is something that every city should take up and can take up. This is how we raise the ceiling of our struggle. We know that in this moment, there has been a paradigm shift, right? In awareness over Palestine. Awareness over Palestine has grown. It has become mainstream due to the sacrifice of our people. And that sacrifice of our people has brought this fervor to our struggle. But the consciousness of the people has not reached its ceiling, because ceasefire is not the end. We push that ceiling by continuing to spread the demand for an arms embargo like a tidal wave across this country, and across every sector that we can find. And so we all have a role in this, and there's many different ways that we can actually pursue an arms embargo on a local level. Whether you have the research or not, whether you have, progressive electeds or not, whether you have labor unions that support or not, there are many different avenues that you can take to make sure that this continues to be something top of mind and connected to all of the other local issues that your city is and organizations and community in your city really cares about.
Thank you so much, V. That was so good. Like, I really want to echo this. Like, anyone can raise this demand. Like, these can be even symbolic campaigns. It's also just about keeping Palestine at the forefront of the agenda and being able to continue to isolate Zionism and maintaining Israel's pariah status. And, like as V was saying, there are multiple cities identified in this report that was shared that I keep dropping in the chat that Iman has been sending out as well in response to some of your questions. But even if you know that your city sends a certain amount of military funding to Israel, like taxpayer dollars get sent to fund contracts with weapons companies to create arms to go to Israel. So like, I mean, even this knowledge like is enough about like your city's complicity to be able to raise demands for an arms embargo. And we have the military funding map on the US campaign's website that you can use. But just knowing about your city's complicity and genocide, regardless of what information you're finding, like there's always something that we can do to confront, isolate Zionism in our locales. And, it's going to look different in different places. Like we're seeing people in the chat talk about, we're doing an Israel bonds divest campaign. We're hearing about different university divestment campaigns. The APAC out of US politics that I saw a campaign that was referenced in the chat as well. There's many ways for us to be doing this. And I think it's what, V is saying to kind of raise the political will for this demand and the implementation of it. So I'm gonna call on also coming back to the organizing happening in the state of Virginia around this. Rokhaya, if you want to talk about how you all were able to effectively bring together a statewide coalition of organizations, which is not an easy thing. A lot of people have a lot of questions about how to build effective coalitions. So just curious if you could talk to us about how you're able to bring together groups who, are all working on their own campaigns around a shared strategy and a shared vision and a shared political demand. And what challenges did you face in this and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, thank you, Celine. And thank you so much for everyone who organized this event. I'm really excited to talk to you guys. But yeah, so for the VRS No Pensions for Genocide campaign, our coalition is comprised, it's a steering coalition, and it's really the core coordinating body of the campaign. And it consists of PYM, the DMV chapter of PYM, Virginia Coalition for Human Rights, AMP, the local chapter of PSL, the local chapter of VSA, and a local coalition of formations called Virginia for Palestine. And PYM was kind of the organization that convened these other orgs and formations into a coalition. And the way we kind of went about thinking through this before we even had this coalition was we just started by power mapping and actually thinking through what are all of the existing campaigns and organizations across Virginia that are, organizing for climate justice, labor, Palestine solidarity, anti-militarism, to really think through what are the overlaps in values and targets. And I think the reason that this is such a significant, important step, in actually building out a coalition is that this is a mass-based statewide campaign, right? And so we really wanted to think about what organizations have power and influence in different counties and cities and bases across the state of Virginia. So for example, our PYM chapter's base is mostly Arabs and Muslims, especially around the Northern Virginia area. And so we know that our coalition also needs to be connecting with other bases across Virginia that we don't necessarily have access to and we don't have power or influence in. And so that's really what having a coalition actually allows us to do. And really starting with the idea of finding shared principles and bringing groups together around common values. So ending war profiteering, protecting workers' pensions, building accountable governance in Virginia instead of kind of immediately thinking through strategy. And so we really, I think, approached coalition building relationally and I guess what I mean by that is like prioritizing long-term trust when we're actually setting out to build this coalition. So this meant spending a lot of time in conversation about vision and power before actually moving into public facing work. So we had our first phase of the campaign was actually fully internal and was fully centered around like building these relationships with different organizations that we like identified across the state of Virginia. And so we did this a lot through a lot of one-on-one conversations and small group strategy calls, and really made sure that every organization felt ownership over the direction, the strategy of the campaign. And I think something that is unique about this campaign and just like pension fund divestment campaigns in general is that so many people across the state of Virginia, every public and state employee and taxpayer, they're all stakeholders, and they all have their retirement money invested against their will in these companies. And so for us, a big priority was discussing what this campaign actually meant to all of these organizations, members, and bases. Thinking through how do we build buy-in for the campaign within our own organizations, which are all, different people that come from different sectors, whether it's teachers, state workers, healthcare workers, and with varying levels of politicization and connection to the Palestinian liberation movement. And so part of actually convening this coalition was talking through all of these points of difference and how to map these points of difference onto the campaign so that it's a campaign that is flexible and adaptable and accessible for a wide variety of communities, and not just for the sake of doing that, but actually because that is the nature of this campaign. It is a campaign that hundreds of thousands of Virginians are direct stakeholders in. And so we, and just in general, we because of this, we treated strategy as really sort of like a living process. So we were constantly reassessing and reevaluating our political openings and our power mapping, our allies. And I think that like the larger point from this is that like a coalition in terms of this campaign isn't just infrastructure. It's actually like a vehicle, not just for driving forward the campaign, but also through to drive forward building these connections across all these different movements and communities in Virginia. And so in terms of the structure of the coalition and how we actually carry out the work once we publicly launch the campaign, we thought together as a coalition, as a steering body, about the goals of the campaign and what we would need to carry out, what is required to carry that out. And we looked at that alongside the different tactics and strategies and community bases that each org brings to the table. And so that was actually how we structured the work of the coalition. And Lubna touched on this a little bit, but we created 4 different fronts of the campaign. So media, mobilization, labor, and electoral. And these fronts essentially function as working groups, and each front is led by 1 or 2 organizations in the steering coalition that kind of drive forward the work of that front. And we actually didn't initially start with the structure. It kind of evolved as the campaign went on. And I think what it allowed us to do was move beyond just like dividing up tasks, because that's not what a coalition is. It allowed us to actually build ownership of the campaign for each organization. And it also allowed us to really start thinking about like different areas of work that reflect the strengths and interests of every organization in the coalition, so that we could structure ourselves strategically. And questions we asked ourselves, like how can we share leadership on different fronts? What are the different buckets of work that need to be built out? What are the different strengths that we need to build out? And that also informed a lot of who we reached out to ask to join the steering coalition. So really leading with the strategy of the campaign. In it, so we have these like different working groups that structure our coalition's work, but members from any organization can actually join these working groups. And we have representatives from organizations that are not even on steering, but have strengths and interests in a specific front of work. And I think that having this kind of structure allowed us to make the campaign a lot more fleshed out, instead of just having steering coalition organizations and non-steering. And I think what it allowed us to do, and what I think is really important for these kind of local campaigns, is actually building out like a middle tier, a middle level of engagement, organizational engagement, so that we can have more organizations taking up the campaign in different ways. So just as an example, our labor working group is led by a couple of organizations in our steering coalition, but we're actively like recruiting members of unions and organizations and formations across the state of Virginia, across different sectors, across different counties, that that join the labor working group and that help with creating and driving forward the labor strategy of our campaign. Or like on our mobilization front, for example, we have members who are not on the steering coalition but they're based in Richmond, Virginia, which is where the VRS is based out of. And because the mobilizations are happening in Richmond, they're able to set a lot of the strategy and inform a lot of the strategy that we have for our mobilization front. So it's not really just like steering and coalition that's setting the vision and directing it. It's more of a structure that allows for a fluid, layered infrastructure that really expands our capacity and political reach without losing any like coherence on our goals and our tactics. And I think in terms of challenges, I think naturally there's always going to be challenges when bringing together like so many different organizations. And I think for us, a challenge was the fact that like every organization has different like priorities and organization styles, and kind of finding a way to like bring all of these, finding a way to make these differences a strength for the campaign. And so every group came into the coalition with different, maybe different theories of change, or some groups might be more used to formal advocacy and other groups are more used to working on grassroots mobilization and direct action. And so, but I think the fact that this campaign is a mass-based campaign that necessarily needs to have different tactics is actually, we realized like was part of the solution to this challenge, because each group is kind of able to take on tactics and strategies that align with their experience and strengths. And so this is also part of why we frame divestment as a multi-issue. It's not a single issue. It's about protecting pensions and labor. It's about reducing war profiteering. It's about advancing responsible investment. So there's so many other issues that we can tie into the ultimate demand of an arms embargo. And I think that what this allowed for is it allowed different groups and organizations to actually see themselves reflected in the campaign. And it really built a broader, more resilient coalition, because everyone had a stake in the success, because they actually materially do have a stake. It's all of our money. It's our public and state institutions that are actually being invested in death and destruction against our will, against our input. So the coalition is really more than just a strategy. It's actually a manifestation of this consciousness that we all have not only a moral, but actually a material imperative and responsibility to organize for an arms embargo, because it is our money. We are materially connected to the war machine on a state level. Yeah, and so I think just to kind of tie this back to the overall like idea of pushing an arms embargo on a local level, I think that having a coalition, having a broad, strong coalition demonstrates broad support, right? So a coalition, I think, it signals that divestment isn't just a fringe demand. It's actually backed by a wide range of sectors and communities and causes. And building lasting and like multi-tiered campaign infrastructure is, I think, really the key to having a coalition that is broad, but is also still cohesive and centered around our ultimate demand of an arms embargo. And I think that this model, it doesn't just strengthen our immediate demand for VRS divestment, it actually lays the groundwork. It lays the groundwork for a deeper, for more of an alignment among different movements who are confronting militarism, or labor, or climate, or Zionism. Local campaigns actually they make this abstract demand for an arms embargo concrete, because they connect all of these different global struggles to the actual institutions and budgets and decision makers that are literally operating in our backyards. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, perfectly. Thank you so much. That was really great. Yeah, all of you, like, it was really perfect. You got through strategy, how you guys like have done effective outreach, built coalitions. And I think it's like pretty clear also that running a strong campaign has a lot to do with having these strong like organizational or coalitional, like having this infrastructure. You know, it's not just about like what do we know about our city, it's like how can we get people also like structurally like organized around it. And I think it was really helpful to hear how you both have approached this in your locales and kind of overcame these challenges that we hear a lot about. Like every group has, you know, its priorities. We're talking about intersectional messaging, how we're framing these campaigns like on a rhetorical level and narrative level, but also like materially, you're right, like everyone does have a stake because we're talking about all of our, you know, taxpayer dollars, funds, whatever, being invested in the war machine, basically. So I guess like maybe my final question to both of your groups is like, if you want to share just a little bit more about any calls to action. We saw a lot of questions about how people can get involved. I think especially for people who are calling in from you know, places that are kind of near you all, like what are volunteer opportunities, ways people can get involved, and question about can everyone sign your petitions? And I'll drop all the links in the chat again. So I don't know, V, maybe if you want to go first, just about, and also, and if you all have any closing comments too, any closing thoughts would be great. And then maybe we'll have a bit of time to answer like a question or two. So maybe V, I'll pass it to you first.
Yeah. Just want to encourage people to read the report, armsembargonow.com. Please also go to the petition and sign it at armsembargonow.com/petition. Anybody can sign the petition. You don't have to be in the Bay Area or in Oakland to sign the petition. But if you do have friends or family who live in the Bay Area and Oakland, definitely send them the petition to have them sign it. We also have designs up there on the website for buttons, for posters, for stickers, for flyers, so you can use those as templates if you would like. We also are inviting all organizations to sign on and to endorse the campaign. You can go to armsembargonow.com/endorse, and you can fill out the form there to endorse the campaign and to sign on. So we're also, you know, hoping to get as many organizations as possible to also, you know, support the campaign and to endorse the campaign. So these are some of the calls to action: is the petition, you know, reading through the report and endorsing the campaign, as well as, you know, popularizing it through flyers, through posters, and through buttons and stickers, which we have all the designs up on our website for. You know, and I think I mentioned this, you know, throughout my presentation, but I think I just want to reiterate it and leave off with kind of this understanding of how we need to make arms embargo a local struggle, because it's how we leverage our people power to enact a material change. And it's only through an arms embargo that a ceasefire can actually be enforced. So in this moment where we are seeing the ceasefire, you know, be peddled by the people in power as the end to the war and the end to the genocide, we know that it is not the end to the genocide. We know that it is not the end to the suffering of the Palestinian people. And it is even more important that we continue to make this relevant and continue to make this important and on the minds of our people, and consolidating all the support and the consciousness that has been raised around Palestine and around the barbarity of the Israeli government to our people. And that happens through raising that ceiling and raising the demand for an arms embargo. And I think that, you know, when we look at how the South African apartheid regime fell, right, it was because of the global isolation of the South African regime by international actors and by the global solidarity movement. The global solidarity movement and the global movement for Palestine is one of the biggest strengths and supports for our people, and a bulwark against genocide and against the barbarity of the Israeli military against our people. And it's through strengthening that global movement, utilizing our power in strategic and important ways, raising the ceiling of our struggle, and making it a relevant and a local issue, making it something that is, you know, relevant to every person. This is not something that's just happening abroad. This is something that is here. That is something that is in our cities. It is in our locales. It is in our institutions. and we have a responsibility to confront it and to stop it. And we also have a responsibility to fight and to build a fighting movement across struggles, right? That is the only way that we can win, is building that broad movement and building those relationships and building those connections in order to make it so that we have this and strong and fighting movement against these systems of oppression. And Palestine is not something that's isolated from it. It's not something that's separate from it. It is something that is central to it. So, you know, I'll leave off with that importance of taking back the arms embargo work, finding ways to implement it creatively and in different ways in your locale. And I'll pass it over to Lubna and Ruqayya for a final comment.
Also, thank you so much, V. Also for Lubna and Rokhaya, there's just a question. If in addition to ways people can support the work, a question if you can speak a little bit more on the middle tier level of engagement in the coalition, and yeah, like was that about a specific need for orgs that didn't have as much alignment, or kind of just more about the logic for that? But yeah, pass it to you both.
Yeah, I can go ahead and start, and I don't know if you want to add anything as well. But yeah, to answer the question about the middle tier of engagement, so this is actually kind of like a new strategy that we're moving forward with, and so it'll continue to evolve like the coalition itself. But I'd say it was more out of a need for, you know, organizations that maybe just don't have the capacity to be like a full-on steering member, or that maybe are very strong in one area of work. So for example, for unions, they are much more able to like drive forward the campaign like from a labor perspective. So it makes sense for them to be engaging with the campaign on the labor front. The steering coalition is more organizations that are driving forward the campaign across all the different fronts. So the middle tier of engagement is really for building out these different fronts and strategies across the state. Yeah, I hope that answered your question. You can also feel free to reach out if you'd like to talk more about this. In terms of action items, follow us on Instagram, VRS Divest. You know, and we're doing a lot of popularization work through Instagram. So any, you know, commenting, liking, reposting any of our content is helps with that. VRSDivest.com is our website. You can sign our petition. You also don't have to be in the state of Virginia to sign. So I encourage you all to sign if you can. You can also, any organizations or groups or unions or formations can endorse on our website as well. If you're in Virginia or in the DMV, you're interested in canvassing and helping with popularization, you can reach out to us on our Instagram or on our website. And I guess just to kind of wrap up with some final words, but yeah, arms embargo, like I think to a lot of people sounds like an international issue, but we know that the systems that are actually sustaining war and genocide they're deeply local, right? The weapons are flowing through our highways, our ports, our airports, our public funds, our state institutions. And so, yeah, map where this war profiteering is actually showing up in your community, map which companies are operating nearby, which institutions are investing in them, which public officials are connected to them. And, you know, I think this really like turns what is an abstract moral stance to a lot of people into a concrete local fight, right? And it's really building out a local campaign is really about turning a demand from a moral imperative into an actual material one. So help people to see their material stake in the issue and in the demand for an arms embargo, find ways to translate the demand into local material terms. And I think that when people understand that militarism and war and genocide is funded by their taxes, their tuition, their labor, that demand becomes a lot more real. And I think that's really what we're called upon in this moment to do, is to create avenues and channels and infrastructure for people to act upon that material imperative.
Wow, thank you both. Thank you everyone so much. Lubna, did you want to add any thoughts, or did Rokhaya cover it?
I think she covered it. The only thing is, again, I think Rokhaya already said it, but if you are based in the Virginia area, the DMV area, if you are or know that you're divest or invest in the VRS, we would love to talk to you. So go on our website, it's vrsdivest.org, and you can fill out some information there.
Amazing. Yeah, this is perfect. I mean, just to reiterate some of the things that they all shared, like map where this is happening locally. You know, you can use FOIAs, you can just look it up. Like there's a lot we can find just looking things up, honestly. So, and also talking to people, like outreach, like engaging different organizations. This is part of research. Like this is how you start learning about like what's happening in your locale a lot of the time. So, and V was mentioning like union resolutions, working with electeds to raise the demand. Like there's so many ways we can do this. And we just saw in the chat, different groups share their own efforts and their own campaigns that they're working on related to divestment and arms embargo. So again, our task ahead, because this is a United States genocide at the end of the day, this is a US-backed Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people, is that we play this role of continuing to isolate Zionism, continuing to confront Zionism, and really pushing the efforts for an arms embargo in whatever way that we can. So again, thank you all so much. I think we sent all the materials in the chat, and we'll send the links in the follow-up as well. So in the follow-up email, we'll share other ways you can get involved, and just like we'll be continuing to send out information about future webinars, strategy meetings, and resources that you all can use. I know I saw like I don't know, V, if you want to in particular add anything to just about like general research guidance. I saw a lot of questions about that, but I think what we said about like including outreach, but also like other ways people can find info. Otherwise, definitely check out the Oakland report, because that also has a lot of information in there, not just about Oakland. So yeah, I don't know, V, maybe I'll pass it to you to have the last word, and then we'll close.
Yeah, I would say just read the Oakland report. We have our citations in there. We looked at export and shipping data in order to gather the statistics and the facts that were released in the report. And we've been looking at the F-35 supply chain now for like over a year, and have been able to find, Oakland not just as an anomaly, but this is likely happening in the backyards of more US residents than not. And also, if there isn't something, like, just to reiterate, if there isn't, a clear avenue through research or a clear kind of connection to the supply chain of genocide in your locale, in your city, there are also still so many other ways that you can have a tangible impact in raising the political ceiling and generating the political will for an arms embargo. That has been, really crucial and really important to the movement as a whole. So yeah, I would encourage people with questions about the research to read the report, and to see if their city is represented there. And if not, there are many other avenues. And through those relationships that you're able to build with labor unions or with elected officials or with other organizations on a local level, a lot of times there's information and more, avenues and opportunities that open up through those relationships. It's not just, finding some contract online that shows these shipments or shows this connection, but also through those relationships, you can also find those opportunities and those avenues. There's many different ways to build that.
Exactly. And ultimately, like, this is about the power of organization. Campaigns are a vehicle to do that, but we want to get people permanently organized. So if you're in an organization, keep building it. If you're not, join one, build one. And yeah, we'll continue to move forward with our task of continuing to strengthen the solidarity movement for Palestine, and to organize until Palestine is liberated from the river to the sea. So thank you everyone so much, and we'll see you on the next one. And thanks to our speakers again. You all are getting a lot of love in the chat. So yes, please sign their petitions, visit their websites, and we'll see you soon.